All right, the title of this presentation is Light, Energy, and the Origin of Chronic Disease. I'm going to walk you through my current understanding of what causes chronic disease, specifically through the lens of mitochondrial biology and what's called bioenergetics. The information in this PowerPoint is what has led me to believe that most of the common complex diseases we are experiencing today are rooted in something incredibly simple, a lack of sunlight. So there's going to be some science involved, but I genuinely believe anyone can understand this and benefit greatly from it. So the first question, just how bad are the current rates of chronic disease? They are very bad. Chronic diseases are the leading cause of illness, death, and disability in the United States, affecting more than half of the population. Approximately 6 in 10 Americans live with at least one chronic disease. If you are curious, a chronic disease is any condition that lasts at least 1 year, requires ongoing medical attention, and may limit daily activities. Here are some more statistics. 8 of the top 10 leading causes of death in the U.S. are caused by chronic disease. Worldwide, 3 in every 4 deaths now result from chronic disease. Nearly 93% of adults 65 and older have at least one chronic condition, with 78% having 2 or more. And about 90% of our healthcare budget now is spent on just treating these conditions, with heart disease, Alzheimer's, and cancer being the big 3. So here is a quick video from Dr. Doug Wallace, one of the world-leading researchers of mitochondria.
What is really discouraging in the biomedical arena is the global community is spending literally the equivalent of trillions of dollars to understand these diseases. Yet with all the effort that we've all put into it and all the money that we've invested, we've really not effectively eliminated any one of these diseases, or even really materially able to treat them in an effective way. So that's really a surprise, because you would think with all the resources that have been invested, we should have been able to do better. So then the question is, well, why didn't we do better?
Why didn't we do better? What a fantastic question. So what Dr. Doug Wallace, among other mitochondrial researchers, are suggesting is that we are studying the wrong thing. Why are the rates of chronic disease only getting worse the more research, the more money, the more attention we put into these things, right? So the lack of understanding the true origin of chronic disease, that is what leads to these higher rates of chronic disease and the failure to treat them. So common sense says to understand system failure, identify what has changed the most, and that means how we're living our lives, how we're treating our bodies. And like Dr. Wallace said, why didn't we do better? What broke the body's natural state of coherence? So this leads to this new paradigm, bioenergetics. Almost all the energy in a cell comes from the mitochondria. So why aren't we studying the mitochondria? Without energy, we can't move, right? Our body can't undergo all these functions. We aren't animate. The energy is what gives rise to life, right? So this may seem oversimplified, but disease can actually be defined as an energy deficiency. And this number is thrown around by various researchers, but I've seen this pretty consistently now. Up to 95% of chronic diseases are rooted in mitochondrial dysfunction. So this paper here is revolutionary. I would highly encourage you to go read it if you're interested in biology. Basically what Dr. Doug Wallace says is that the classical Mendelian genetic perspective, it has failed to adequately explain the biology and genetics of common metabolic and degenerative diseases. So this surge in rates of chronic disease that we've seen over the past century, this cannot be explained by the gradual mutations in our nuclear DNA, like we're told. The reason being is that these diseases are primarily systemic bioenergetic diseases, and the most important genes are our mitochondrial DNA. Reason being that those genes code for the proteins in our mitochondria, which determine the efficiency of our body's ability to make energy. So this is a new paradigm that ties everything together. If disease is actually just fundamentally an energy deficiency. And this formula for life, Dr. Doug Wallace commonly refers back to this. It's anatomy, the genes, plus energy, plus information. And that's what Western medicine fails to account for, is the energy availability in the system. So mitochondria make the energy, which serves as the information to construct anatomy, and that means your nuclear genome. Chronic disease, therefore, is not genetic, it is bioenergetic, and this is, in my opinion, extremely empowering, right? So this has everything to do with how we are living our lives. We're not subject to some disease because we have some preconceived genetic inheritance. So mitochondria, a brief overview. They are commonly referred to as the engine of the cell. 90% of the energy is made there. They make up 30% of our body weight. They regulate intracellular calcium levels, which is very important. They also trigger apoptosis, which basically means once a cell has gone bad, it's put to death. And then they influence the epigenome, which means what genes are turned on and off based on our lifestyle. This is a diagram of the electron transport chain. This is where energy is made in the mitochondria. All you need to remember is OXPHOS, which is oxidative phosphorylation for short, and the energy made here is what's called ATP. So this is a diagram that comes from Dr. Wallace. What he has discovered in his lab is that oxidative phosphorylation, failure in the mitochondria, that's what downstream leads to all these diseases that we are experiencing today. So an energy deficiency, that is what drives every form of pathology. Like I said, this unifies everything. So I wanted to circle this here as well. Environmental factors, how we are living our lives, what foods we're eating, our relationships, our stress levels, if we're getting in the sun, our toxin exposure, all of those things are going to contribute to our body's capacity to create energy, in particular the mitochondria. So here's another quick video.
Of energy. So once you decide that energy is more important and central to medicine than anatomy, then suddenly all the common diseases have exactly the same pathophysiological mechanism, and that is the efficiency by which the mitochondria make energy.
The efficiency by which the mitochondria make energy. That is everything when it comes to our health. So now, to view chronic disease through a mitochondrial bioenergetic lens. What is the number one killer of human beings? It is heart disease. What is the most mitochondrially dense organ? It's the heart. Do you see the correlation? Neurodegenerative disorders. The brain is an energy hog. It only makes up 2% of our body weight, but uses 20% of our body's energy supply. So if the neurons in our brain, which some have up to 1 million mitochondria, if those mitochondria aren't working, that's when we experience neurodegeneration. Cancer. What does the leading researcher of cancer worldwide, one of the leading researchers of cancer worldwide, say about the cause of cancer?
So clearly, all of these germline mutations are secondary risk factors. The primary cause of cancer is interference or inefficiency of chronic disruption of oxidative phosphorylation.
Chronic disruption of oxidative phosphorylation, failure in the mitochondria, that's what causes cancer. And remember the big three, the most money we are spending on diseases: heart disease, neurodegeneration, and cancer. All three caused by mitochondrial dysfunction. Fires me up to talk about. And Dr. Thomas Seyfried, he's a great researcher. He wrote a good book called Cancer as a Metabolic Disease. I haven't read it, but I know it is a great book in terms of understanding the origin of cancer. So for anyone who's still skeptical, this process is called mitochondrial retrograde signaling. Basically, an energy deficiency and an increase in free radical production from failure in the mitochondria, that's what gives rise to the change in the epigenome. That's what serves as information for what genes to transcribe, and that's what leads to the chronic disease. So the nuclear genetic mutations, those are just fingerprints at the crime scene. The murderer who is guilty are the broken mitochondria. The broken mitochondria is at the very top of the entire disease etiology. So, additional research. The mutations in nuclear genes observed in tumor cells are considered downstream epiphenomena secondary to disturbances in mitochondrial function, and that pertains to cancer, from Dr. Seyfried. Dr. Wallace found in his lab that mitochondrial DNA mutations are sufficient by themselves to cause disease. And as you introduce more and more mutations into the mitochondrial DNA, the more disease they were able to replicate in these mice. And I wanted to say one more quick thing here. There are studies that show that if you have healthy mitochondria and you insert those into a cell with a highly mutated nuclear genes, that cell will stay healthy, and vice versa. If you have broken mitochondria and you put them into a cell with a healthy, non-mutated nuclear genome, that cell will become cancerous. Diabetes and obesity. If the furnace is blocked but you keep putting in fuel, those carbs and fats will accumulate in your bloodstream. That's metabolic syndrome, and diabetes is the result. So what can we conclude from that? That you have to fix the engines before you fix the fuel, your diet. You have to fix the mitochondria before you fix what you eat. And that is how you lose weight. It's only when the mitochondria fails that you get fat. Aging. This is also driven by your mitochondria. The efficiency of your mitochondria determine the rate at which you age, which makes perfect sense. Why are there people who smoke cigarettes and don't exercise, but they live until they're 110? It's because their mitochondrial DNA. And then so basically aging is just the gradual loss in how many mitochondria we have in our body. So now that we understand disease and aging is an energy deficiency, what is the best thing for the health of our mitochondria, right? We gotta ask that. And the answer is sunlight. So there are many mechanisms to this. I'm just gonna cover the first one, photobiomodulation it's called, PBM for short. I also wanted to briefly touch on this. So the solar spectrum emits all these various wavelengths of light that all work in harmony. We have UV, we have visible light, and we have infrared. UV creates vitamin D in the skin. Visible light is what gives rise to color. Blue light within visible light is the circadian signal. Infrared light, which is over 50% of sunlight, that's what creates heat, and that's what supports our mitochondria, which we will see here. So photobiomodulation, what is it? This is red light therapy. Red and near-infrared wavelengths are absorbed by an enzyme in the mitochondria, cytochrome C oxidase. Normally nitric oxide is bound to that enzyme, but when this enzyme absorbs red and near-infrared, nitric oxide is released, and the mitochondria they're more able to use oxygen. And that's what leads to all of these benefits that you see from red light therapy: increased energy production, enhanced cell signaling and repair, reduced inflammation, improved hormonal balance, mood regulation. So this is what happens when your mitochondria work better. All the benefits you see from red light therapy, this is all from having healthy mitochondria. But what we forgot is that over 50%, over half, 54% of the solar spectrum is infrared light, with a large portion of that being near infrared. Red light, this is always present during the daytime. So these two wavelengths of light that our mitochondria use directly, they are present during daylight at all times, from sunrise to sunset, and especially during sunrise and sunset. So this is a perfect representation of how much we have detached ourselves from nature. The sun has all of these healing benefits, but we think we need to put thousands of dollars into these red light devices, right? And these devices emit polarized light. The sun is non-polarized light. It's like this beautiful vibrating dance of photons that's constantly changing. It's extremely dynamic. And then here are some papers that show just how beneficial this PBM mechanism is. It shows promise for treating conditions like dementia, stroke, brain trauma, Parkinson's, and even depression. And then this looks complex, which it is, but these wavelengths of light are absorbed by this enzyme at complex 4 in the mitochondria. That's what increases ATP. That's what increases nitric oxide levels, which is what's going to lower blood pressure. And then it increases reactive oxygen species, but this is at a controlled level, which is basically like a signaling molecule. And all of these things through the mitochondrial retrograde signaling, this is what determines what genes are then transcribed. So you see here activation of the transcription factor. Here's another paper that showed that longer wavelengths in sunlight, which is infrared, near infrared all the way up to far infrared, these wavelengths pass through the human body and have a systemic effect which improves vision. So the message here is to get outside. Also, the body has these special mechanisms installed to collect near-infrared photons. The retina, it allows for more infrared photons, near-infrared, than visible light. You think the eye is responsible for seeing color, but it actually allows more near-infrared into the eye than visible light. And the reason being is that the mitochondria, they are incredibly dense in the retina. Amniotic fluid, when a woman is pregnant, the amniotic fluid is designed to carry near-infrared photons into the fetus. And you'll see here, even the cerebral spinal fluid, which is this fluid that basically our brain and spinal cord are bathed in, this fluid is also designed to bring near-infrared photons from the sun into deeper parts of the brain. So if you still think we aren't designed to be outside, look at this research here. So near-infrared light, it also shuts down cancer cells. And this was because of the increased levels of reactive oxygen species, which, like I said, are a signaling molecule. So just by being outside and bathing in near-infrared light, which also is reflected by any greenery, so just by being outside, even in the shade, you're getting a ton of infrared. That shuts down cancer cells. That induces what's called senescence, which is basically once a cell is shut down, it can't divide anymore. And then, like I said, remember, to understand why a system is failing, look to what has changed most. And what has changed the most within the past 100 years regarding our lifestyles is that we now spend 93% of our lives indoors. The real deficiency is infrared light. Why are we not talking about infrared light? If most diseases are rooted in mitochondrial dysfunction, and the mitochondria uses these wavelengths of light directly, why are we not talking about infrared light? Now, to conclude, we are in a chronic disease epidemic. Almost all of these chronic diseases are rooted in poor mitochondrial health. And sunlight, it's quite clear, sunlight is how we heal the mitochondria. The mitochondria is designed to absorb wavelengths of light emitted from the sun. So thank you for watching. Thank you for staying until the end, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.